They said she didn't belong there. Not in that neighborhood, not in that car, not with that voice that refused to bow down. The moment she stepped out and questioned them, two white officers who just slammed a teenage boy of color against the hood of a squad car, they looked at her like she'd broken some unspoken rule. Like her skin tone had overstepped some invisible boundary. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't threatening, she wasn't even near them. She simply said, "He's a child. You don't put your hands on children like that." That sentence, calm and firm, was all it took. One of them turned. The other grinned. The air shifted. That's when it started. "Excuse me. You got a problem, ma'am," the taller one spat, stepping toward her like she was the criminal. She didn't move. Her stance remained calm, precise, trained. But they didn't see that. They didn't care who she was. They didn't ask. Because to them, she was just a black woman, standing too tall, speaking too directly, challenging their authority in a space they considered theirs. One of them pulled out his cuffs without even asking for ID. She calmly told them she was active duty military. That she had clearance levels they couldn't imagine. That they were making a mistake. "Oh yeah," the one with the cuff said, smirking. "Then you won't mind proving it downtown." They grabbed her wrists, twisted them, hard. Pushed her face first against her own car. People across the street watched. No one stepped in. "You're hurting me," she said. "This is unlawful." "Shut your mouth," came the reply. And just like that, she was in the back of the squad car. No rights read. No explanation. Her purse left on the pavement. The boy they'd attacked had run off. Her phone was gone. Her badge, her military ID, ignored. They didn't care. Not that night. But what they didn't know, what they refused to believe, is that she wasn't just some angry black woman stepping out of line. She wasn't someone they could silence or shove into a jail cell without consequence. She had authority. Real authority. She had built her career for over 2 decades in silence, in discipline, in sacrifice. She had buried soldiers. Led missions. Survived war zones. But nothing, prepared her for the war she'd face in her own country, on her own soil, from the people who swore to protect it. They mocked her in the car. One of them said, "Maybe next time you'll think twice before talking back." The other laughed, calling her a liar. But their laughter faded the moment she made that call. It was a protocol known only to top-level military personnel. A direct line. Not to a lawyer. Not to a local commander. To the Pentagon. She said her name. Her ID. Her command code. And 5 minutes later, a secure alert was sent to Homeland Security, to military intelligence, to the Department of Justice. They didn't even hear it coming. The police station never saw that kind of silence. Within hours, suits arrived. The kind of men and women who don't show badges, they show purpose. Desks were flipped. Cameras were pulled. Statements were taken. By the morning, those same officers who laughed in her face were in handcuffs. Not for excessive force. For conspiracy. For targeting. For racially motivated abuse of authority. The city tried to contain the story, but it was too late. It leaked. And when it leaked, everything leaked. Bodycam footage they tried to delete. Reports they altered. Names of other victims. Other complaints swept under the rug. What they'd done to her was just the final straw. The one that cracked the dam. Because now, the entire nation was watching. People wanted to know, how could a high-ranking officer, a decorated general, be treated like a criminal in her own city, by the very people sworn to serve her? And if it could happen to her, who else had it already happened to? The answer was devastating. Behind those badges were years of cover-ups. Dozens of incidents buried. Victims silenced. Lives ruined. And the city had paid out settlement after settlement, quietly, secretly. But this time, the silence broke. And the reckoning began. And here's the part no one saw coming. The public didn't just rally behind her. The military didn't just defend her. They deployed her. Not with weapons. With truth. She was granted full access to every case those officers had ever touched. Her name was broadcast nationally. She was given the power to investigate systemic abuse across every department in the city. They called it a victory. But for her, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. But one question still lingers, one truth no one has been able to uncover fully: what exactly did she say on that phone call? What words turned her from a prisoner in a back seat into the architect of a reckoning that took down an entire chain of corruption? And more importantly, why did one of the officers start crying when he saw her again in court, not out of guilt, but out of fear? Stay with us. Because what you're about to hear will change the way you see everything. Before we begin this powerful story, we want to speak directly to every Black viewer watching this video. We see you, we stand with you, and we honor your strength. At Plow of Twist, we do not tolerate racism in any form, not in real life, and certainly not in the stories we tell. This platform exists to expose injustice, celebrate resilience, and uplift voices that the world too often tries to silence. You're not alone. You matter. And your story matters. Now, get ready for a gripping journey filled with injustice, strength, and a twist that no one saw coming. Don't forget to subscribe to Plow of Twist and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. Enjoy the story. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon in Jackson, Mississippi, one of those humid southern days where time seems to slow down under the weight of heat and history. The streets buzzed with their usual rhythm, the distant sound of gospel spilling out of a neighborhood church, the steady rumble of old cars crossing cracked pavement, kids kicking balls barefoot across uneven lawns. This city carried ghosts, ghosts of injustice, ghosts of change, ghosts of voices that had once shouted in protest and prayers, many still unheard. But amidst this ordinary afternoon, something extraordinary was walking down Martin Luther King Jr. Drive in a simple, gray athletic hoodie, cargo pants, and a calm that disguised her entire past, General Ayanna Brooks. Ayanna wasn't the kind of woman you'd forget. She had that type of presence that made people straighten their backs and check their posture without even realizing it. Her walk was measured, steady, intentional. Her eyes held weight, the kind of weight only those who've seen war up close could understand. She was a 46-year-old Black woman born and raised in this very city, on this very street, in a two-bedroom home just 5 blocks from where she now walked. Back then, the neighborhood had been louder, rougher, poorer, but filled with people who loved fiercely and looked out for each other like kin. Her mother, Diane, had worked double shifts as a nurse for over 30 years, and her father, Charles, was a Vietnam vet who rarely spoke but always showed up. It was from them Ayanna learned the value of discipline, dignity, and determination, the 3Ds she would carry with her all the way to the Pentagon. She wasn't dressed like someone who held one of the highest ranks in the U.S. Army that afternoon. That was intentional. She liked walking like that, blending in, feeling the heartbeat of the streets that raised her. She'd flown into Jackson the night before, planning to visit her old high school to give a surprise motivational speech for a group of girls in the ROTC program. It was something she did often, quietly, never publicized, because to her, leadership wasn't about the cameras. It was about who you showed up for when no one else did. That morning had started like any other. She'd had coffee at Marla's Cafe, the same corner spot her mother used to take her after Sunday church. She stopped by her old house, now owned by a cousin, and then decided to take a detour through her old neighborhood on foot, just to breathe it in again before heading to the school. Her military-issued SUV was parked a few blocks away, secure and unassuming. Her phone was charged, her documents stored, her schedule relaxed. There was no detail, no escort. She didn't need one. Not here. This was home. But home can be a complicated word. As she passed a corner store, something caught her eye. Two police cruisers, lights spinning but sirens off, parked diagonally across the street. A commotion. People gathered but silent. Ayana's instinct sharpened, not just the training, but something deeper, older. A young black boy, maybe 15, was being pressed against the side of a patrol car. Not handcuffed, not resisting. Just held. Hard. Too hard. His shirt was soaked in sweat, his cheek pressed to hot metal, his eyes darting, not in fear, but in panic. One officer was towering over him, yelling something Ayana couldn't hear. The other stood back, arms folded, scanning the crowd like a wolf guarding his meal. Ayana didn't approach with aggression. She stepped forward slowly, clearly, visibly, the way all trained officers do when they want to de-escalate. She raised one hand, not in protest, but in communication. Her voice was calm, professional, direct. She asked if everything was all right, if the boy was being detained, if his rights had been read. She made no threats. She gave her name, identified herself as a high-ranking member of the military. She asked for their badge numbers. She reminded them of protocol. That's when it all shifted. The officer who had his hands on the boy turned slowly. His name tag read, Watkins. He was tall, mid-40s, with a shaved head and jaw clenched like a pit bull. His eyes narrowed the moment he heard her tone. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right, and black, and unafraid to say it out loud. The other cop, Officer Taylor, was younger, late 30s, lean, twitchy, like a coiled spring. He smirked. That kind of smirk that men wear when they feel untouchable. Ayana didn't flinch. She knew that look. She'd seen it in war zones and strategy rooms alike, the look of men who didn't fear consequences. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was her city. And she refused to walk away while a child was being treated like prey. Watkins stepped toward her. He asked if she had a problem. His voice was low but sharp. Ayana repeated her credentials. Told him again, calmly, who she was. She even reached for the wallet in her cargo pocket, slowly, deliberately, to pull out her ID. That's when Taylor moved. In one rapid motion, he lunged forward, grabbed her wrist, twisted it behind her back, and slammed her against the car door. The sound of metal and bone colliding snapped through the air like a shot. Ayana's face was pressed to the glass. Watkins stepped in beside him and helped pin her, even as she shouted that she was military, that they were violating federal law, that they were committing an act of assault. But it didn't matter. Not to them. Taylor sneered, said she was lying, said she was resisting. Watkins called for backup. And in a matter of minutes, Ayana Brooks, a decorated general, a veteran of multiple combat tours, a woman who had briefed presidents and commanded battalions, was sitting in the back of a police cruiser with zip ties cutting into her wrists and a bitter taste of injustice fresh in her mouth. And still, she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She watched. She memorized faces. License plates. Timing. She focused her breathing and waited. At the precinct, it got worse. Her words were met with mockery. Her request for a phone call was delayed. Her possessions were lost during booking. And when she tried once again to explain who she was, the booking officer rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath, "They all say that." But Ayana knew better. She had seen systems fail good people. She had seen how power corrupts and protects itself. She also knew that the military didn't play by the same rules as local politics. There were lines you didn't cross. And they had just crossed them all. In a dim holding cell with peeling paint and the smell of mildew, Ayana sat alone, back straight, eyes closed, heart pounding with a mix of rage and clarity. She waited. She calculated. She knew her team would notice her missing. She knew protocols. And when the moment came, when they finally handed her a phone, after hours of delay, she didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call a friend. She called the one number that changed everything. And while the officers who arrested her laughed in the hallway, bragging about putting her in her place, a quiet storm had already begun to gather far above them, one that would not just shake their careers, but unravel an entire system they thought would protect them. Because Ayanna Brooks wasn't just a soldier. She was a strategist. And they had no idea what kind of war they had just started. The hours dragged on like years inside the cold concrete walls of that precinct. Ayanna sat in silence, not because she was defeated, but because every word she might have said would have fallen on ears trained not to listen. The booking officer, a woman in her 50s with tight lips and eyes that never once made contact, processed her information as if she were invisible. The fluorescent lights above flickered occasionally, the only interruption to a thick, unsettling quiet. The sound of phones ringing, muffled arguments behind closed doors, and footsteps echoing through the hallways were the only markers of time. Every minute, Ayanna could feel the weight of her restraint growing heavier, but it wasn't the plastic cuffs or the cold bench beneath her, it was the restraint of knowing she could destroy all of this with one sentence, and yet choosing not to, not yet. When Officer Taylor returned, his smirk had faded, replaced by an uneasiness he tried hard to hide. He opened the holding cell and stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Still not gonna tell us who you really are?" he asked, voice laced with sarcasm but shaking just slightly around the edges. Ayanna looked up slowly, her gaze piercing. "You don't want to know who I am," she said, her voice calm, measured, and terrifying in its stillness. Taylor scoffed but didn't respond. He turned and left without another word. Elsewhere in the precinct, Watkins was trying to get ahead of the situation. In the break room, he was on the phone with someone, whispering sharply. "She says she's some military big shot," he muttered, back turned to the door. "We brought her in for interfering. No badge on her. No ID. She was being difficult." He paused, listening. "Nah, no press yet. But we'll need to get the report cleaned up before any of this hits the records." His voice dropped further. "She made a call though. Claimed it was to the Pentagon. Probably bluffing." Another pause. "I'll make sure it disappears." That, more than anything, was what Watkins had become good at, making things disappear. Reports. Complaints. Even people, in some ways. He and Taylor had been working together for 6 years. Partners in a very particular game of control. They knew how to pressure, how to manipulate, and most of all, how to cover each other's tracks. There had been complaints in the past, yes, some formal, some whispered, but nothing ever stuck. The city didn't want scandals. The department didn't want headlines. And their records remained clean, even when the streets told a different story. Back in the holding area, Ayanna was finally escorted to a small interview room. Inside was a metal table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner, and a single folder placed neatly in the center. The detective assigned to her case, Samuel Reed, entered with a cautious step. He wasn't like the others. Early 50s, biracial, eyes lined with years of exhaustion and compromise. He sat across from her, hands folded, watching her. "You've been quiet," he said. Ayanna tilted her head slightly. "I've been observing," she replied. He nodded slowly. "You have a name for me yet?" She leaned forward. "General Ayanna Brooks. U.S. Army. Serial number 228640991. I was illegally detained while attempting to prevent the abuse of a minor by your officers. This conversation is being recorded. I strongly suggest you proceed with caution." Reed blinked. Then, quietly, he opened the folder. Inside were copies of her military ID, her clearance profile, her command record. They hadn't believed her at first, but someone, somewhere, had started looking into it. He exhaled slowly, then met her eyes. "This complicates things." Ayanna didn't smile. No, it clarifies them. Reed sat back, rubbing his jaw. Do you want to file a complaint? Ayanna paused. What I want, she said, is for you to ask yourself why two of your officers felt comfortable throwing a decorated general into a squad car without verification, without protocol, and without consequence. She leaned in. Because I promise you, I'm not the first. I'm just the one with power. The silence that followed was loaded. Reed could feel it in his bones, something was coming. Something bigger than him. Bigger than the station. And when he stepped out of that room, his hands shook. Later that evening, word had started to circulate in whispers. One of the desk sergeants had gotten a call from someone in internal affairs, a quiet heads-up. Then the captain received a vague but firm email from the DOJ about protocol inconsistencies. By the time Watkins and Taylor clocked out, they were both visibly tense. You think it's gonna blow over? Taylor asked as they got into the cruiser. Watkins didn't answer at first. Then, we'll handle it like we always do. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. Meanwhile, Ayanna was released without apology, without a statement, and without any documentation. She was told mistake had been made. No officers met her eyes. No one walked her out. But as she stepped outside into the night air, her phone buzzed. It was a secure message, line activated. Full review in motion. Stand by. She nodded once, then deleted the message. The wheels were in motion. The next few days moved fast, but beneath the surface. Ayanna didn't go to the press. She didn't shout online. She went quiet. Strategic. Her team, now fully aware of the incident, pulled surveillance footage, accessed bodycam logs, and secured time-stamped communication records. Names were cross-checked. Complaints reopened. Civilian statements gathered. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a system that allowed Watkins and Taylor to thrive unchecked. In Jackson, news traveled fast when it needed to, but there was confusion. Rumors. Some said a high-ranking military official had been arrested. Others said it was a setup. Some said she was undercover. The police department issued no official comment. The mayor's office stayed silent. But tension grew like a storm on the horizon. At the school Ayanna had planned to visit, students whispered in hallways. Some had heard what happened. Others only knew someone powerful was watching the city now. In a classroom where her face had once been shown on a poster honoring local heroes, one of the ROTC girls asked her teacher, "Is it true? They arrested her just for speaking?" The teacher didn't answer. She just turned and erased the board in silence. And in quiet rooms behind closed doors, pressure began to mount. City officials held hushed meetings. Lawyers whispered about liabilities. Journalists dug through archives. And at the heart of it all, Ayanna Brooks waited, not out of fear, but timing. She knew when to strike. When to speak. And when to make the kind of move that would leave no doubt, no denial, and no way to silence the truth. But what no one knew, not the city, not the department, not even her team, was that Ayanna had one final piece of leverage. Something she hadn't yet revealed. Something only 3 people in the entire Department of Defense had access to. A record. A confession. A buried file that, if released, would not only expose Watkins and Taylor, but shake the very foundation of law enforcement in Jackson. And the time to reveal it was coming. Because soon, the courtroom lights would flicker. Cameras would turn. Faces would pale. And the men who once smirked in the dark would finally see who they had dared to cross. But the question is, are they ready for what she's about to unleash? The courtroom was nothing like what Officer Watkins imagined it would be. It wasn't the dull, slow-moving formality he was used to from years of testifying. There was no swagger left in his walk, no confidence in his step. The atmosphere was thick, as if everyone present knew that something bigger than procedure was about to happen. He sat rigid in his suit, flanked by his lawyer, trying to hide the sweat crawling down the side of his neck. Taylor sat beside him, pale, jittery, his knee bouncing uncontrollably. They hadn't spoken much since the indictment, only short, forced exchanges. Whatever loyalty they once had was corroding fast under the weight of what they were facing. Ayanna hadn't arrived yet, but her presence filled the room anyway. Reporters had taken seats in the back, pens ready, cameras already rolling from the street outside. The prosecutor moved with the energy of someone holding a hand full of aces. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses and sharper questions, tapped her gavel and called the room to order. When the doors finally opened, Ayanna entered without a glance to either side. Her posture straight, uniform immaculate, eyes forward. The medals pinned to her chest weren't for show, they were reminders. Every step she took toward the witness stand felt like a reckoning slowly crossing the room. Watkins clenched his fists under the table. Taylor stared at the floor. Neither of them looked at her. The prosecutor wasted no time. "General Brooks, can you state for the court the nature of the call you made on the evening of your detainment?" Ayanna looked straight ahead. "I invoked Emergency Federal Protocol 14B. Authorization Level Alpha. I reported an unlawful arrest of a federal officer in active duty status. I also submitted a flag code for internal investigation of corruption within the arresting agency." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Watkins's lawyer stood. "Objection, Your Honor, that procedure is confidential." The judge didn't even look up. "Overruled. She has clearance. Continue." The prosecutor stepped forward. "And what was the result of that call, General?" Ayanna's voice remained steady. "An audit was opened on the Jackson Police Department. My team was granted temporary joint oversight with military intelligence and internal affairs. All bodycam footage, dispatch logs, officer histories, and sealed complaints were reviewed." The silence was painful. Then the prosecutor turned slightly, lifting a remote. The screen flickered to life. It was bodycam footage, but not from the night of her arrest. It was from 6 months earlier. A teenage boy, handcuffed in the back seat of a cruiser, begging to go home. Watkins's voice audible, laughing, mocking. Taylor calling him a little punk who needed to be taught a lesson. The boy had filed a complaint. It had vanished. But now, here it was, unedited, time-stamped, authenticated. A second clip followed. This time, it showed Taylor shoving a homeless veteran outside a liquor store, mocking him for smelling like failure. The man had filed a complaint too. It never made it past the front desk. The footage cut to the night of Ayanna's arrest. It showed her calm voice. Her military ID. Watkins snatching it from her hand, tossing it onto the ground. Taylor grabbing her from behind. Her face hitting the cruiser. A moment so visceral it stole the air from the room. But the real shock came after. Ayanna didn't look at them when she spoke again. These men operated under the belief that no one was watching. That they were protected. That their badges were shields against accountability. "What they didn't know," she said, pausing, "is that I trained the analysts who decrypted their data logs. I led the unit that built the audit software used in their review. I personally reviewed the transcripts of every deleted complaint they thought was erased. And I activated the protocol because it was time someone did." Taylor flinched. Watkins swallowed hard. The prosecutor leaned in. "General, can you confirm for the court what you found in Officer Watkins's personnel file?" Ayanna nodded once. 10 internal complaints. 6 for excessive force. 2 for racial profiling. All sealed. 1 filed by his own colleague, Officer Jenkins, who resigned shortly after it was buried. The lawyer for Watkins stood again, desperate. "This is a smear campaign," Ayanna turned to him finally. "No. This is a reckoning. The judge called for order as murmurs broke out across the room. But it didn't end there. The prosecutor wasn't done. She pulled out one last document. A thin, folded piece of paper. Your Honor, we'd like to submit Exhibit F, a signed statement from a former Jackson PD records clerk, who testified that she was ordered to destroy Ayanna Brooks's detainment file the night of her arrest. The courtroom froze. She refused. And instead, she preserved the original, filed a secondary copy under a dummy case, and submitted the statement directly to military command. We have both copies. And a signature. The judge's face hardened. Admit it. Ayanna exhaled slowly. Watkins leaned forward, whispering something to his lawyer, who shook his head. Taylor wiped his forehead, trembling. And then Ayanna looked at them both for the first time. You thought this was just about me, she said quietly. But it never was. It's about every person you silenced. Every badge you tarnished. Every story that got buried because no one believed them. I believed them. Watkins tried to speak, for the first time since she entered the courtroom. We didn't know who you were, he said, almost pleading. Ayanna's expression didn't change. And that's the problem. The judge recessed the court. Outside, reporters flooded the hallway. Inside, two men sat at a defense table, no longer officers, no longer confident, watching everything they'd built turn to ash, not because of a mistake, but because they finally ran into someone who couldn't be erased. And somewhere deep in the justice system, doors began to open. Investigations expanded. Files long forgotten were dusted off. Victims came forward. The tide had shifted. But there was one more move left. And Ayanna hadn't played it yet. When the courtroom doors closed behind her, Ayanna didn't feel relief. Not yet. The applause from outside was muffled, distant, background noise to a storm still roaring inside her. She stood in the hallway, her posture unchanged, her breathing calm, but her hands were clenched at her sides. There was something unfinished in the air, something that hadn't yet been spoken. The trial wasn't over. Not technically. The court had adjourned for the day, but Ayanna knew the weight of truth didn't depend on the courtroom schedule. Justice wasn't punctual. It arrived when it was ready, and sometimes, it demanded more. She turned a corner and found herself in a narrow hallway where Officer Taylor stood alone, his lawyer off making calls. His eyes caught hers, and for the first time since the night of her arrest, he didn't look away. He looked small, and younger somehow, like the arrogance had been stripped from him along with his badge. His voice cracked when he spoke. Why are you doing this? The question hung between them, absurd in its desperation. Ayanna didn't respond immediately. She took a step forward, slow and deliberate. You think this is punishment? She asked, her voice low. You think this is revenge? She shook her head. I'm doing this so you remember what you did. So you understand that behind every person you humiliated, shoved, silenced, there was a story. A mother. A future. A voice. You just never listened. Taylor leaned back against the wall, defeated. I didn't know they kept those files, he muttered. We were told, she cut him off, her voice rising, sharper. You were told what? That people like me don't matter. That your reports would disappear if you pushed hard enough. You were told wrong. He looked down. I didn't think it would go this far. Ayanna's eyes burned, not with rage, but with something deeper. It went this far the moment you shoved a teenager into a car and laughed while he cried for his mother. It went this far when you erased the names of people who begged you for help. It went this far the moment you decided your badge made you untouchable. Taylor swallowed hard, nodding slowly, but it wasn't understanding, it was fear. Elsewhere in the building, Watkins was seated alone in a holding room. His lawyer had stepped out to handle damage control with the media, leaving him in silence. He stared at the floor, jaw tight, leg bouncing. When the door opened, he expected a bailiff, but it was Ayanna. She didn't speak at first. She just closed the door behind her and stood across from him, arms folded. He didn't rise. He didn't meet her eyes. "I didn't come here for drama," she said. "I came for truth." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Truth? There's no truth in this building. There's politics. Optics. Headlines." Ayanna didn't flinch. "There's truth. You just never thought you'd have to answer to it." Watkins finally looked up. His face was tight with exhaustion and resentment. "You think you changed something here?" he asked. "This city's been like this long before you showed up. You don't fix it with one trial." She stepped closer. "You're right. I didn't fix the city. But I made sure it doesn't forget. And I made sure you're not the last." His voice rose, desperate now. "I built my career protecting this place. I did what had to be done to keep people in line." "No," she snapped. "You did what made you feel powerful. You hurt people because it was easy. Because no one told you no. Until now." He stood suddenly, pacing. "You don't get it. You come in with your stars and stripes, thinking the law works the same way for everyone. It doesn't. Out there. On the street. You blink and you're dead. We're not soldiers with structure and rules and backup. We're alone." Ayanna's voice was razor sharp. "You chose that job. You swore an oath to protect, not to punish. And when you started treating fear like a tool, you broke that oath." He laughed, dry and bitter. "What do you know about fear?" Her face hardened. "More than you could ever handle. But I never used it to control anyone. I learned to survive it, rise above it, turn it into leadership. You used it like a weapon." There was a long silence. He sat back down, eyes hollow. "You want me to say I'm sorry?" "No," she said, stepping toward the door. "I want you to remember this moment. Every day. I want you to hear every victim's voice in your head when you sleep. I want you to carry the weight you made others carry. That's your sentence." And she left him there. Outside, the press swarmed, hungry for quotes and sound bites. Ayanna didn't stop. Her team formed a circle around her, leading her to the waiting car. Inside, it was quiet. She exhaled, closing her eyes, letting herself feel it, not victory, but release. The kind that comes from knowing the truth is no longer buried. Her aide, Janelle, turned in the front seat. "You sure you want to do this?" Ayanna opened her eyes. "The press conference?" Janelle nodded. Ayanna looked out the window, watching the people gathered. Protesters. Supporters. Young kids holding signs with her face on them. "They need to hear it," she said. "Not the facts. The truth." The car pulled up outside City Hall. She stepped out to applause, but it was the silence afterward that hit her. A hush of anticipation. Phones up. Eyes wide. She stepped to the podium. "This isn't a celebration," she began. "This is a reckoning. Not just for the men who arrested me, but for every system that let them thrive. I didn't come here to destroy anyone. I came to reveal what we've ignored for too long. That the uniform should not shield you from accountability. That power without integrity is corruption. And that silence, ours, theirs, yours, is complicity." She paused. "My name is General Ayanna Brooks. I am a soldier. A daughter. A sister. A survivor. And today, I stand not as a symbol, but as a witness. To what happens when courage meets consequence." Behind her, the mayor stepped out, flanked by new officials. A community review board was being formed. A task force assigned. A new chapter was beginning, not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. And in the crowd, Taylor stood at the edge, his badge gone, his career shattered, watching as the woman he once tried to erase stood tall at the center of a storm she'd turned into clarity. Ayanna stepped down from the podium, but not from her mission. Because the truth was out now. And it was only the beginning. The news didn't fade the next day. Or the next. In fact, what Ayanna unleashed in that courtroom rippled far beyond the city of Jackson. It wasn't just about the prosecution of 2 officers or the dismantling of a department's rotten core. It was about the mirror she'd forced the country to look into. For decades, there had been whispers, reports buried, victims dismissed, always with a headline that was here today and gone tomorrow. But now, it wasn't just a story. It had a face. It had a name. And the public was watching, not just for justice, but for answers. What Ayanna had ignited was no longer just about her. It had become a national reckoning, and with that came a pressure she never asked for but could no longer refuse to carry. In the days following the trial's climax, Ayanna returned to the base where she had once trained recruits and debriefed generals. The environment was quiet, sterile, secure. Her uniform now drew different kinds of stares. Not for its authority, but for what it represented. She wasn't just a general now. She was a symbol. Inside the compound, a meeting had been arranged between her and the Joint Task Oversight Committee. Their request was clear: help design a new civilian oversight structure in collaboration with the military. Use her case to set precedent. But Ayanna felt the weight of this invitation. It wasn't just policy they were asking for. They were asking her to relive the trauma, to institutionalize it, to dissect her own pain and turn it into protocol. Inside the meeting room, General Harper, a man she'd served under years ago and one of the few she still respected, opened the conversation with a sincere but heavy tone. "You've changed the national conversation, Ayanna. People trust you. You've earned that. But what you choose to do next, that's going to define more than just your career. It's going to shape how history remembers this moment." Ayanna didn't respond right away. Her eyes drifted to the documents laid out before her, drafts of new training procedures, disciplinary policies, racial bias protocols. All of it promising. All of it political. She finally spoke, softly. "The system doesn't need another binder. It needs accountability." Harper nodded, but Ayanna continued, her voice gaining strength. "We keep thinking we can legislate morality, but we can't. What we can do is make it impossible for the wrong people to keep hiding in the right uniforms." That night, she sat in her quarters alone. Her phone buzzed constantly: interviews, endorsements, public appearances. Everyone wanted a piece of the victory. But for Ayanna, there was no celebration. Only reflection. She remembered the boy she saw that day, the one who had sparked everything. She hadn't seen him since. She didn't know his name. But his face lived in her memory, not as a symbol, but as a reminder. She had power now. But power was meaningless if it didn't serve those who had none. The next morning, Ayanna drove back to the neighborhood where it all began. She wore no uniform. No media knew. She stood on the same corner and watched the rhythm of life return to the place. It hadn't changed. Not really. She found the local youth center, a small brick building with a fading mural of civil rights heroes on the side. Inside, she asked for the director, introduced herself, and quietly inquired about the boy. His name was Malik. 15. No permanent address. In and out of the system. A good kid, they said, just angry, tired, slipping through the cracks like too many others. Ayanna sat down with the director, a woman named Corinne, and asked what they needed, not for show, not for a grant proposal, but right now. The list was endless. She listened. She took notes. And when she left her personal number. Meanwhile, in Jackson, the department faced its own transformation. The new interim chief, a black woman named Renee Campbell with a background in ethics enforcement, had been appointed with unanimous support from city officials. She was stern, unshakable, and absolutely uninterested in preserving the old order. Her first move was to reopen every sealed complaint filed in the last 15 years. Her second was to order all officers to undergo psychological re-evaluations, implicit bias retraining, and mandatory civilian review interviews. But what made her presence electric was her transparency. Every step of her reform was public. Every internal memo was published. The community saw it happening in real time. And slowly, distrust began to unravel into cautious hope. But change bred resistance. Not everyone was ready to let go of the old way. A group of officers who had once worked with Watkins filed grievances, accusing the city of conducting a witch hunt. Anonymous threats were sent to Ayanna's email. Someone left a defaced photo on her car. And one night, as she exited a meeting with civil rights advocates in D.C., she found herself face to face with a former high-ranking officer who whispered, "Careful who you humiliate. The system remembers." That moment wasn't fear, it was clarity. She realized then that exposing truth was only one part of justice. The other was endurance. Change wasn't a switch, it was a siege. One that would demand stamina, sacrifice, and a willingness to stand alone if necessary. Still, not all confrontations were hostile. A few days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Inside were only 3 lines, "I watched it all. I was wrong. I'm sorry." There was no signature, but Ayanna knew the handwriting. Taylor. She folded it quietly, placed it in a drawer, and never spoke of it again. Forgiveness wasn't something she was ready to give. But acknowledgement, that was something. Maybe the beginning of it. Then came the dilemma that forced her into the deepest moral debate of her career. A private meeting with a federal investigator presented her with a sealed report, a complete record of every internal act of corruption, not just from Jackson, but from precincts across the country. Hundreds of pages. Names. Cover-ups. Coordinated silence stretching back decades. The investigator leaned in, whispering like the walls had ears. "You could leak this. You'd burn it all down. But it'll destabilize entire departments. You'll make enemies you'll never see coming. Are you prepared for that fallout? Because once this goes public, there's no control. No protection. No walking it back." Ayanna stared at the file. This wasn't just about right and wrong anymore. It was about risk. Consequences. Lives. Reputations. Innocent officers who might be caught in the crossfire. She thought of the boy. Of the mothers who buried sons while reports were buried with them. Of the cities still pretending they had no ghosts. She took a breath. She didn't answer yet. Because the choice ahead wasn't simple. It was justice. But at what cost? And was she ready to pay it? Ayanna sat alone in the government safe room, the sealed report still in front of her. The fluorescent light buzzed softly above, and the heavy silence pressed down on her chest like armor that wouldn't come off. Her fingers hovered over the cover. Her instincts as a soldier told her to act, to strike, to release the truth like a missile. But her soul, the part of her that had once held a child's hand in a war zone, that had written letters to grieving parents, that had seen what collapse looked like, trembled at the weight of it. She wasn't afraid for herself. Not anymore. She had already been dragged, bruised, exposed. What haunted her now was the idea of starting a fire she couldn't contain, one that might burn the very people she had sworn to protect, including those who were innocent but trapped inside a broken structure. The cost of truth wasn't theoretical. It had names. It had families. And it had the power to shake the country into chaos. Her aide Janelle knocked gently before entering, holding her tablet, her expression tight but calm. "They're asking again," she said quietly. "Media. DOJ. Activist coalitions. They want to know what you're going to do." Ayanna nodded, but didn't speak. Janelle sat across from her, setting the tablet down. If you go public, we have allies. They're ready. They'll back you. It won't be easy, but it'll be big. Ayanna looked up, her voice low. And if I don't? Janelle hesitated. Then we try to fix it from within. Quietly. One policy at a time. One reform. One battle. But we lose momentum. The public forgets. The system stalls. And they rebuild stronger in the shadows. There was no comfort in either path. Later that evening, Ayanna returned to Jackson. She hadn't planned to, not so soon, but something in her told her she needed to be there. She drove past the precinct, now under new leadership, lights still on late into the night. She turned off the main road and headed back to the youth center. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter than before, kids seated in circles, laughing, talking, safe. Corinne greeted her with tired eyes and a warm smile. You always show up when it matters, she said. Ayanna replied, it matters every day. They sat in the office, the door slightly ajar, as voices drifted in from the hallway. He's been coming back, Corinne said, gesturing with her chin. Malik. Not every day. But he's trying. Something about seeing you on that podium shook him. In a good way. Ayanna leaned back. Does he know I'm here? Corinne smiled. No. But if you wait, I'll make sure you run into him. An hour passed before she saw him. Taller than before, still thin, eyes older than his age. He walked through the hallway with headphones on, head down. When he saw her, he stopped in his tracks, frozen. She stood slowly. Hey, she said gently. Malik didn't move at first. Then he pulled off his headphones. You're really her, he said, voice small. Ayanna nodded. And you're really you. They sat outside, the night warm and still. The conversation didn't come easily at first. Malik fidgeted with his sleeves. Ayanna waited. Finally, he said, I thought they were gonna kill me that night. Ayanna didn't look away. I know. He glanced over. Why'd you even stop? You didn't know me. Her voice softened. I didn't need to. I just knew it wasn't right. Malik looked away, blinking fast. They always get away with it. My cousin, he got jumped by cops last year. Filed a report. Nothing happened. They laughed at him. Ayanna's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. That's why we don't let them stay hidden anymore. He looked at her, then down again. But they will. Right? After all this, they'll just find new ways to hide it. She hesitated. Maybe. But now they know someone's watching. Someone's willing to fight. He was quiet for a moment. I want to fight too. But I don't know how. She looked at him, eyes steady. Start by staying alive. Finish school. Take care of your people. Speak up when you're ready. That's how we build the next wave. Malik looked at her like she was speaking another language. But he nodded. Slowly. And something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The next morning, Ayanna stood before a round table of federal officials. The file was in her hand. She laid it on the table but didn't open it. Instead, she began to speak. I've been asked to make a decision. One that could trigger national panic or national progress. One that could ruin careers or reform institutions. But before I decide, I need to ask something. She looked each of them in the eye. What are you willing to risk? A pause followed. The room stiffened. She continued. Because I've already risked everything. My name. My body. My peace. I've carried the weight of a system that nearly crushed me. And I did it not for revenge, but for truth. For justice. But justice isn't mine alone to deliver. It belongs to all of us. She reached into her bag and pulled out 2 envelopes. One labeled, full release. The other, strategic phase. She placed both in the center. I'm not here to burn the world down. I'm here to light the way. If you want chaos, open the first. If you want change, help me build it step by step. But I won't be the only one carrying the blame when it gets hard. They didn't speak immediately. Finally, one of the younger officials leaned forward. And if we choose the slow route, and they come for you? Ayana's eyes didn't waver. Let them. That night, Ayana didn't sleep. She walked the perimeter of the base, remembering the sound of boots on sand, of soldiers whispering in foxholes, of letters written in case they didn't come back. She had fought so many battles. But this one was different. There was no uniform that could protect her from the moral battlefield she now stood on. Only choice. And in the dark, with the wind brushing against her face and the stars overhead, she whispered to no one, to everyone, to the ones who came before and the ones still waiting to be heard. I see you. I remember you. I won't stop. Because even if the system remembered her for humiliation, for defiance, for disruption, the people would remember her for something else entirely. For courage. It was 2 weeks before she returned to Washington. By then, the public frenzy had started to plateau, but the tension underneath remained. Editorials debated whether Ayana Brooks was a patriot or a destabilizer. Some pundits framed her as a hero reclaiming integrity in a corrupt world, while others painted her as a disruptor with no regard for law enforcement stability. Neither version fully captured her truth. Because Ayana wasn't chasing praise, and she wasn't running from controversy. She was calculating. Waiting. Watching to see who had the courage to stand beside her when the lights dimmed and the cameras turned away. When she walked into the federal building that morning, she walked past security with barely a glance, her credentials now instantly recognized. But respect wasn't what she felt. She felt the weight of eyes, some admiring, some fearful, many skeptical. It didn't matter. She wasn't there to be liked. Inside the conference room, the final decision lay on the table, literally. The committee had split. Half of them wanted the full release, to let the nation see what the institutions had concealed for decades. The other half pushed for containment, a strategic approach to prevent riots, preserve order, and manage reform behind the scenes. Ayana stood at the head of the table, unmoved. The Secretary of Domestic Affairs looked at her with a polite but strained smile. General, you've heard both sides. You've reviewed the implications. This isn't just about principle anymore. It's about impact. If we unleash the entire document, police departments across the country will collapse. Lawsuits, resignations, lawsuits again. People will panic. Others will exploit it. Cities could burn. Ayana nodded slowly. And if we don't? He sighed. Then we slowly implement reform. Quietly hold people accountable. Work case by case, build better training programs, diversify command. But the public will forget. And the next scandal will hit harder. She let the silence stretch. Across the room, a junior analyst, barely out of her 20s, broke protocol and spoke. They'll come for her either way, she said, eyes locked on Ayana. The question is, are we going to let her stand alone? Ayana looked at the analyst. There was no fear in her voice. Just raw honesty. For a moment, she saw a younger version of herself, before war hardened her resolve, before silence became strategy. She turned back to the table. I've made my decision. But I'm not announcing it here. I'll announce it to the people. They deserve to hear it from me, not from filtered headlines or spin doctors. And I'll take whatever comes with it. That afternoon, she walked the halls of the Capitol building with her team. Janelle stayed close, her energy protective and fierce. "You sure about this?" she asked. Ayanna nodded. "I'm tired of choices being made behind doors." Janelle exhaled. "Then I'll stand right next to you." As they reached the press chamber, reporters were already gathered in chaos. Live feeds were rolling. Microphones clicked on. Everyone wanted the answer to the question that had electrified a nation: would she release the full document? Would she tear the veil completely off the structure she once served? When she stepped up to the podium, the room hushed in an unnatural way. You could feel hearts beating faster. Throats tightening. Phones trembling in the hands of those live streaming every second. Ayanna cleared her throat. "I've been handed a decision that carries the weight of our country's soul. A decision that doesn't just affect systems, but lives. Communities. Families. Futures." Her voice was strong, but not cold. "I have in my possession a full and verified document detailing decades of internal corruption within our law enforcement institutions. Names. Evidence. Silenced complaints. Hidden investigations. Patterns that reveal not a few bad apples, but a rotted culture allowed to thrive in the dark." She paused. "Let that sink in. There are those who believe releasing this will cause chaos. They're not wrong. The truth shakes things. Truth doesn't ask for permission to be convenient. It just is. But silence has cost us too much. Delay has buried too many lives. Reform without exposure is theater." She took a breath. "I've chosen to release it. Fully. Transparently. Not to destroy the system, but to force it to look at itself and finally change. I trust the people more than I trust the machine." The room exploded. Reporters shouted questions. The live stream surged with comments. Janelle stepped forward and whispered, "It's done." But Ayanna didn't feel relief. Later that night, she sat in the quiet of her home, a modest apartment just outside the city. No bodyguards. No entourage. Just stillness. Her inbox had filled with threats, praise, confessions. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. She ignored it all. Instead, she scrolled through comments from everyday people. A mother in Detroit thanking her for validating her son's trauma. A retired officer confessing regret. A teenager in Atlanta saying he felt seen for the first time. Amid the chaos, these messages were her compass. The next morning, federal agencies scrambled. Departments issued statements. Emergency town halls were convened. Civil rights groups mobilized. Lawsuits were filed within hours. And Ayanna became the center of a legal, political, and cultural storm. But what truly struck her, what made her pause, was an unexpected email from Malik. It wasn't long. Just a few lines. "I saw what you did. They're scared now. Maybe that's good. I'm thinking about applying to the academy. Not because I want to be a cop. Because I want to be a different kind of cop. Thought you should know." She read it 3 times. Then once more. And she wept. Not from sadness. Not even from pride. But from the knowledge that maybe, just maybe, this fight was building something, not just tearing things down. That night, Ayanna returned to the youth center. No media. No ceremony. Just her. And when she walked through the door, Malik was there. They didn't speak right away. They just nodded. Then he said, "You really did it, huh?" And she replied, "Not yet. But we're getting there." Because this wasn't the end. It was just the ground finally beginning to shift. 6 months later, the nation was still reckoning with the aftershocks of what Ayanna Brooks had set in motion. The document she released had gone viral, translated into multiple languages, cited in congressional hearings, studied in universities. Protests had erupted in dozens of cities, some peaceful, others tense, but something had shifted. For the first time in years, there was a sustained public appetite not for outrage alone, but for actual reform. Multiple police departments launched independent investigations. Several police chiefs resigned. Training curriculums were rewritten from scratch. The word accountability stopped being just a talking point. It became a demand. And in the middle of this tidal wave, Ayanna didn't fade into the background. She evolved. She was offered a position with the Department of Justice, a high-level role that would have secured her legacy in policy reform for decades. She turned it down. She was offered a book deal, a documentary series, even a teaching post at West Point. She declined them all. Instead, Ayanna established a national organization, the Brooks Institute for Structural Reform. It wasn't a think tank or a political machine. It was an operation, tactical, organized, and built to move fast. Lawyers, activists, former military officers, tech engineers, and community organizers worked under her guidance to identify, expose, and dismantle systems of institutional abuse. Within months, the Institute launched a public database tracking unresolved complaints against officers. They provided legal support for victims, trained local leaders, and created a digital hotline that processed thousands of calls each week. Ayanna wasn't just changing the conversation, she was changing the battlefield. Malik became her first youth fellow. He completed his GED with honors and started community college while working at the youth center as a mentor. The same boy who once feared becoming another forgotten name was now speaking at local schools, helping kids like him believe in something better. He still had moments of doubt, but when Ayanna visited the center, quietly, without cameras, they would sit under the same tree and talk about the future like it was something they could shape, not just survive. One evening, he handed her a folded paper. It was his application to join the police academy. She read it carefully. He had written under reason for applying, to change the view from inside. Not to silence people, but to protect them. To be the kind of officer I never had. She looked at him, eyes misting, and said, "Then do it. But do it with honor." Officer Taylor, after his sentencing, agreed to a plea deal that included mandated public service and education reform contributions. As part of his rehabilitation, he began speaking anonymously at forums about the dangers of unchecked authority. He was never reinstated, never given back a badge. But he admitted guilt. Not just in court, in interviews, in letters to families of victims, in private meetings with civil rights advocates. Ayanna never met with him again. She didn't need to. Some stories didn't require closure, just accountability. Watkins, on the other hand, refused all offers to cooperate. He fought every charge, appealed every ruling. But the evidence was too strong, and the public pressure too great. He was convicted and sentenced to federal prison. In one final statement before sentencing, he stood in shackles and tried to explain his actions as being driven by fear, stress, and poor leadership. Ayanna, watching from the gallery, didn't react. She didn't need to. Because the courtroom no longer belonged to him. It belonged to every face he had overlooked. He left in silence. As for the city of Jackson, it became an unlikely model. A department once notorious for corruption was now rebuilding under scrutiny, transparency, and community leadership. Officers wore body cams by default. Civilians participated in oversight boards. And the school system began incorporating social justice history into its curriculum, inspired by Ayanna's testimony. The streets were still hard. The wounds were still deep. But the silence was over. And in its place was a slow, stubborn chorus of voices rising together. Ayanna stood one evening on the rooftop of the Brooks Institute's new headquarters, a modest, modern building in the heart of Atlanta, chosen for its historical roots and central position. The skyline was lit, and below, the streets pulsed with energy. Janelle joined her, sipping tea, quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You know they're already writing about this in history books, right? Ayanna smiled faintly. History is only useful if it teaches the present. Janelle nodded. Still, you've done more than most dream of. Ayanna looked out over the city. I didn't dream of this. I dreamed of surviving. This is the dream of the ones who didn't make it. She took a breath, deep and steady, and in that moment, she knew she had done what few ever get to do. She had not just risen, she had pulled others with her. She had turned humiliation into movement. Silence into voice. Fear into foundation. And though she still carried the scars, mental, emotional, institutional, she wore them not as wounds, but as armor. And now, to you, the listener, the witness to this journey. What would you do if the world refused to see you? If the system you swore to protect turned against you in an instant? Would you crumble? Would you retaliate? Or would you rise, not for vengeance, but for justice that echoes beyond your own name? Because what Ayanna teaches us is that the real war is not on the battlefield. It's in the boardrooms, the courtrooms, the classrooms, the hearts of those who think silence is safety. She teaches us that one voice, backed by integrity, sharpened by truth, and grounded in purpose, can shake even the most protected walls. And sometimes, the only thing that separates defeat from revolution, is the decision to stand. So, what will you stand for? Let us know in the comments below, what part of this story moved you the most? What would you have done in Ayanna's place? How do you think justice should be served when the system fails? And if this story meant something to you, if it opened your eyes, stirred your heart, or made you reflect, then don't forget to subscribe to Tales of Twist for more powerful, real, and unforgettable stories. Because here, the truth always finds its voice.